Hello everyone, I am Dr. Sumati of the Department of Biochemistry, Biotechnology and Bioinformatics of Avinash Lingam University. We have been watching modules on the paper of Nutritional Biochemistry. Now we will see a module on regulation of glucose metabolism. In the previous modules, we have discussed on the classification of carbohydrates, their types and structure of different classes. Having seen the importance of glucose, the most important sugar that regulates all the metabolic pathways in our body, we shall now discuss in this module about how the metabolism of this sugar is regulated. Glucose metabolism is critical to the normal physiological functioning. Glucose acts both as a source of energy and as a source of starting material for nearly all types of biosynthetic reactions. For instance, if we consider the brain, it uses about 120 grams of glucose daily, which accounts for 60 to 70% of the total body glucose metabolism. The brain has little stored glucose and no other energy stores. Brain function begins to become seriously affected when the glucose levels fall below approximately 40 milligram per deciliter. When the levels of glucose are significantly below this, it can lead to a permanent damage and hence lead to death. The brain has no other alternate source of energy. It cannot use fatty acids for energy because the fatty acids do not cross the blood-brain barrier. But one alternative source is ketone bodies that can enter the brain and can be used as a source of energy in case of emergencies. The brain can only use glucose, or under conditions of starvation, it can use ketone bodies, which include acetoacetate and hydroxybutyrate, for the source of energy. The diet is one source of circulating glucose and provides both carbon and energy sources for the liver by a process called as gluconeogenesis, which we have already discussed in the earlier modules. In the resting post-absorptive state, the glucose present in the blood is around 60 to 100 milligram per 100 ml. Now, after the ingestion of carbohydrate meal, it rises to 120 to 130 milligram per ml. The condition where the blood sugar level is raised above the normal level is called hyperglycemia, and when it is lowered below normal, it is called as hypoglycemia. This concentration depends on two factors. One is the rate at which it enters into the blood, and two is the rate at which it is removed from the bloodstream. So, with this background, coming to the objective of this module is to appreciate the importance of regulating the blood glucose levels. Next, to analyze the various sources of blood glucose and to understand the role of various organs in regulating the blood glucose levels. And finally, to explain the role of hormones in regulating blood glucose levels. First, let us see the sources of blood glucose. The first and foremost source is from carbohydrates present in the diet. Almost all the carbohydrates in the diet after digestion form glucose, galactose and fructose, which will enter the blood and are absorbed into the portal vein. In the liver, galactose and fructose are converted to glucose, and the next source is from various glucogenic compounds. In the skeletal muscle, glucose is oxidized to lactic acid, which is transported by the blood to the liver and the kidney, where glucose is reformed and undergoes oxidation in the tissues. The process is known as the Cori cycle or lactic acid cycle, which we have discussed in the earlier modules. In the adipose tissue, it enters into glycolysis, whereas in the liver, the glycogen is converted to glucose by a process called glycogenolysis. So now, how is this blood glucose level in various organs regulated? The steady state of blood glucose level is maintained by the organs like the liver, skeletal muscle, kidney, and through muscular exercise and hormones. Now let's see what happens to the glucose levels when a meal rich in carbohydrate is ingested. For example, if you eat a potato. So, it's broken down to simple sugars, maltose, and then to glucose, which directly enters the bloodstream. So, when carbohydrates are taken, it raises the blood glucose level. This glucose either enters the blood or it enters the cell where it is used up or it is stored. Now, let's see the role of these organs. First, let's take up the role of the liver. The liver, as you know, all are aware of, is the major metabolic regulatory organ. About 90% of all circulating glucose not derived directly from the diet comes from the liver. The liver contains significant amounts of stored glycogen which is available for rapid release into circulation and is capable of synthesizing large quantities of glucose from substrates such as lactate, amino acids and glycerol, which in turn are released by other tissues. Again, the liver, in addition to controlling plasma glucose, plays another important role in that it is responsible for the synthesis and release of the lipoproteins that adipose tissue and other tissues use as a source of cholesterol and free fatty acids. Now, what happens during prolonged starvation? The liver then becomes the source of both glucose and the ketone bodies which are required by the brain to replace glucose. The liver uses glycolysis primarily as a source of biosynthetic intermediates, with amino acids and fatty acid breakdown providing the majority of its fuel. Like the liver, the kidney has the ability to release glucose into the blood. In conditions when liver gluconeogenesis is necessary, the adipose tissue supplies free fatty acids and glycerol to the circulation and can be taken up by the liver as a substrate for further use. Now, the hormones play a very important role in regulating the blood glucose. So, what is the effect of food ingestion on pancreatic hormone release? The pancreas alters its release of insulin and glucagon in response to changes in the plasma glucose and other circulating nutrients. One major cause of these changes is eating. The response to a meal varies significantly depending on the composition of the food. Intravenous infusion of glucose elicits a smaller rise in insulin release than does oral administration of equivalent amount of glucose. The greater increase in insulin levels caused by actually eating is thought to be due to the gastrointestinal peptide hormones. These peptides are released in response to food absorption and potentiate the glucose effect on insulin release. When eating a meal rich in carbohydrate, insulin level rises and glucagon level falls. The decrease of glucagon is due to the inhibition of the release by insulin and elevation in the plasma glucose. When eating a meal rich in protein, the insulin level rises because insulin secretion is stimulated by the amino acids. Now, here the glucagon level also rises. Glucagon release is stimulated by amino acids. In this case, unopposed insulin action would result in hypoglycemia since little glucose is being absorbed. Glucagon must increase to maintain the plasma glucose. Now, when eating a mixed meal, insulin level rise and glucagon level either rise, fall or remain unchanged as appropriate to maintain the plasma glucose. The pancreas uses its ability to monitor the influx of nutrients, supplemented by signals in the form of intestinal peptide hormones to regulate the disposal of the nutrients without allowing an undue change in the plasma glucose. So, glucose levels usually rise up to the upper limit of normal range, that is approximately 120 mg per deciliter, but it may rise further also. Mimicking this tailored change in pancreatic hormone release is difficult to achieve by injections of insulin, and this explains part of the problem faced by individuals with type 1 diabetes, of which we will be discussing shortly. This picture shows the fed state metabolism, that is, what happens under the influence of insulin. It promotes glucose metabolism by the cells. Now, what acts as a stimuli for insulin secretion? It includes increased glucose concentrations, increased amino acid concentration, feed-forward effects of the gastrointestinal tract hormones, and parasympathetic activity and sympathetic activity of the nervous system. There are multiple stimuli for insulin release. Now, this picture explains the response to hypoglycemia, that is, the condition when the blood glucose level goes down. So, whenever there is a decrease in the plasma glucose level, now the alpha cells of the pancreas will be stimulated and there will be increase in the production of glucagon. Here, again the liver will be activated to three processes, namely gluconeogenesis, glycogenolysis and formation of ketone bodies. In the same way, here the muscle, there will be a decrease in the insulin production, and that will act on the muscle and adipose tissues and leads to the formation of lactate, pyruvate, amino acids, fatty acids, all which in turn will be utilized for the formation of the ketone bodies. So, this in turn will increase the plasma glucose levels. Now again, whenever the plasma glucose level increases, by a negative feedback mechanism, it will inhibit the alpha cells of the pancreas so that insulin glucagon level will be decreased. The ketone bodies will be utilized by the brain. In the liver, although not in pancreas, the activity of glucokinase is regulated by both insulin as well as glucagon. This figure again explains the role of pancreas in regulating the blood glucose levels in response to plasma blood glucose levels. So, here again, when the plasma blood glucose level goes down, or when you eat a meal, as soon as you eat a meal, when the plasma blood glucose level goes high, it will activate the pancreatic cells through the action of the central nervous system. Pancreas will be activated and there will be increased secretion of insulin. As a result, it will act on the target tissues and cause the release of glucose into the bloodstream. Now, some of the enzymes of the gluconeogenic pathway play a different role. They must use different enzymes to reverse these steps. These enzymes include phosphoenol pyruvate carboxykinase and fructose bisphosphatase. These are the ones that are regulated by the hormonal stimuli. Under normal circumstances, alanine is preferred gluconeogenic substrate by the liver. However, all amino acids except leucine can be used as a substrate for the process of gluconeogenesis. Alanine and glutamine are the major amino acids released by the muscle, although they comprise only 15% of the muscle protein. Alanine is produced in the muscle from pyruvate that is derived from both glycolysis and through amino acid metabolism. Gluconeogenesis is inhibited by ethanol because ethanol metabolism in the liver uses up the NAD+ and therefore prevents the conversion of lactate to pyruvate. So, in normal individuals, liver glycogen breakdown yields sufficient glucose to maintain the plasma levels until the ethanol has been metabolized. Whereas, in conditions of malnutrition or poorly managed diabetes mellitus, when the ethanol inhibits gluconeogenesis, it may result in hypoglycemia. Now, having seen the role of two major organs, namely the liver and the pancreas, we will now see the role of skeletal muscles. When you consider the muscle cannot release glucose directly into circulation, but however, its ability to rapidly increase its glucose uptake is critical for dealing with sudden increase in plasma glucose. Skeletal muscles, on the other hand, has an additional role in maintaining the plasma glucose levels. It releases free amino acids into circulation, which will serve as a substrate for liver gluconeogenesis. The muscle can use glucose, fatty acids and ketone bodies for energy. The muscle normally maintains significant amounts of stored glycogen, small amounts of fatty acids, and contains a large pool of protein that can be broken down in emergencies. The resting muscle uses fatty acids as its primary energy source, but glucose from its own glycogen stores and from circulation is preferred for the rapid energy generation, as in the case of sudden exercise. The adipose tissue is the major site of fatty acid storage. Fatty acids are stored in the form of triacyl glycerol, which is synthesized in the adipose tissue from glycerol and free fatty acids. The glycerol phosphate used must be derived from glycolysis in the adipose tissue. Free glycerol cannot be phosphorylated because the adipocytes lack the enzyme glucokinase. Now, next, let's see the role of kidney in regulating the glucose metabolism. Like the liver, as we have discussed earlier, the kidney can also regulate the glucose levels. Under normal conditions of gluconeogenesis, the kidney provides only a small contribution to the circulating glucose. However, during prolonged starvation, the amount of glucose contributed by the kidney may approach that of the liver. Kidney function is very critical for glucose homeostasis, and another very important issue to be considered is that plasma glucose continuously passes through the kidney and must be efficiently reabsorbed to prevent losses. So, I hope now you are clear with the concepts of the role of different organs in maintaining the glucose level. The next factor to be considered is how the muscular activity influences the glucose metabolism. There are two sources by which glucose molecules are available to the working muscle. One is the plasma glucose and the other is muscle glycogen. While very little net glycogen breakdown is observed at low intensity exercise, glycogen breakdown becomes the predominant glucose source at higher intensities of exercise. There are three sites of regulation of skeletal muscle glucose uptake. They are in vivo glucose delivery to the skeletal muscle cells, permeability to glucose, that is glucose transport, and the third one is flux through the intracellular metabolism. Whether one or combination of these factors is the rate limiting to tissue uptake is very difficult to discern. The flow of blood in the muscle can increase up to 20-fold during intense exercise. The increase in muscle perfusion is of large quantitative importance for the increase in glucose supply. If the flow were to be limiting during exercise, a decrease in the interstitial glucose concentration would be expected. However, this is not the case, as the skeletal muscles interstitial glucose concentration is actually higher when compared to the exercising and the rested limbs. Now, all these are observed when the body functions normally. What if a person is suffering from diabetes? In diabetes, where insulin is deficient or where the cells are unresponsive to insulin, the uptake of glucose into the muscle, liver and adipose tissue is significantly reduced. and even though there is abundant glucose in the blood, the cells metabolically start. Hence, they respond by increasing the process of gluconeogenesis and catabolizing the fat and protein. In type 1 diabetes, increased gluconeogenesis consumes most of the available oxaloacetate, but breakdown of fat and to a lesser extent protein produces large amounts of acetyl-CoA. This increased acetyl-CoA would normally be directed into the tricarboxylic acid cycle, but with oxaloacetate in short supply, it is used instead for the production of unusually large amounts of ketone bodies. Acetone can often be detected in the breath of type 1 diabetics, which is an indication of high plasma levels of ketone bodies. In case of uncontrolled severe diabetes, particularly insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus referred to as IDDM, there can be an excessive formation of ketone bodies which may result in a particular form of metabolic acidosis known as ketoacidosis. Type 1 diabetes mellitus is characterized by loss of insulin producing beta cells of the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas, leading to a deficiency of insulin, whereas type 2 diabetes mellitus is characterized differently and is due to insulin resistance or reduced insulin sensitivity, which is further combined with relatively reduced insulin secretion, which in some cases becomes absolute. The defective responsiveness of the body tissues to insulin almost certainly involves the insulin receptor in the cell membranes. In case of gestational diabetes mellitus, which is defined as carbohydrate intolerance of variable severity with the onset of and first recognition during the present pregnancy, the gestational diabetes mellitus is a heterogeneous disorder in which age, obesity and genetic background contribute to the severity of the disease. Women with gestational diabetes mellitus are at risk for later development of type 2 diabetes. GDM is not due to defective secretion of insulin or to disproportionate secretion of proinsulin or glucagon. Only the amount of insulin secretion varies in women with GDM and normal pregnant women. This picture gives us a clear idea of what happens in diabetes. Acute pathophysiology of type 1 diabetes mellitus. So, when a meal is absorbed, as we have already seen, there is increase in plasma glucose, increase in fatty acids and increase in amino acids. But what happens when no insulin is secreted? So, the blood glucose uptake both in the muscles and adipose tissue will be decreased, and this in turn will cause many changes in the liver. In the liver, it will cause to increase ketone body production, increased glycogenolysis and increased gluconeogenesis. The same thing happens to the other tissues also. So, brain, as I told you earlier, is not able to utilize any other source other than glucose. So, it interprets starvation and leads to a condition called as polyphagia. And all these changes in the liver leads to a condition called as hyperglycemia, that is, there is an increase in the blood glucose levels. So, when that happens, it exceeds the renal threshold for glucose. As a result, glucose will be excreted in the urine and it will lead to osmotic diuresis and polyuria, which in turn will lead to dehydration. As a result, there will be a decrease in blood volume and decrease in blood pressure, finally leading to circulatory failure and coma or death. This in turn again leads to a condition called as polydipsia, where the person experiences excessive thirst, and also it leads to a condition, because there is anaerobic metabolism, lactic acid production increases and leads to a condition called metabolic acidosis, where there is urine acidification and hyperkalemia are seen. So, the rate of ventilation also increases. Tissue loss results as a result of fat breakdown. And also whenever the extent of amino acid uptake by cells decreases, there will be increased protein breakdown, especially in the muscle cells, which will lead to increased plasma amino acids. As a result, that again will act as a substrate for the production of ketone bodies, and that in turn also will lead to tissue loss. Now we will move on and see how hormones regulate the glucose levels. The hormones involved in regulation of blood glucose are, they both increase as well as decrease the glucose levels. The hormones which decrease the blood glucose includes insulin and somatostatin, and hormones which increase the blood glucose includes glucagon, epinephrine, cortisol, adrenal-cortical thyroid hormone, growth hormone, and thyroxine. First, let us take up the case of the action of insulin on target tissues. We have discussed some concepts earlier, but some more points to remember are: the liver is the main site of action of the pancreatic hormones, because blood flows from the pancreas proceeds directly to the liver, and because the liver is the major site of inactivation of the most peptide hormones than any other tissue. In the liver, insulin stimulates glycogen synthesis and inhibits glycogen breakdown. It also stimulates glycolysis and inhibits gluconeogenesis. The liver has some ability to respond directly to high levels of plasma glucose by increasing the glucose uptake and glycogen synthesis in a insulin independent manner. However, the majority of liver glucose regulatory functions require insulin action. In the muscle, insulin stimulates amino acid uptake and protein synthesis and glucose uptake, and thereby incorporation into glycogen. The muscle plays an important role in absorbing majority of sudden increases in plasma glucose levels, such as those observed during a carbohydrate-rich meal. During exercise, the muscle becomes more sensitive to insulin action and therefore retains the ability to import glucose from circulation in spite of exercise-induced reduction in insulin levels. Insulin stimulates glucose uptake into the adipose tissue. The brain does not depend on insulin for glucose uptake, and insulin probably does not have a direct metabolic role on the central nervous system. The next hormone to come into play is glucagon. So, the other major regulatory hormone of the pancreas is glucagon. This glucagon has opposite action to that of insulin and helps to therefore maintain plasma glucose levels between meals. However, unlike insulin, glucagon action is probably limited only to the liver and has limited effects in other tissues. Glucagon stimulates the liver amino acid uptake, gluconeogenesis, and glucose release, and it inhibits glycolysis and fatty acid synthesis. Release of glucagon is inhibited by insulin and another hormone called somatostatin. Release of glucagon is also inhibited by glucose. It is not known whether this reaction is a direct effect of glucose on the cell or an indirect consequence of elevated insulin levels. The next hormone is somatostatin. Somatostatin is released from the cells under the control of the same stimuli that result in insulin release. Somatostatin is thought to act primarily as a pancreas regulator of insulin release, preventing insulin levels from rising too rapidly. It may also have an endocrine role as an inhibitor of nutrient absorption in the gut, although this is not completely established. The hormones glucagon, catecholamine, epinephrine and norepinephrine, glucocorticoids and growth hormone all act to raise the plasma glucose level. Their actions generally oppose that of insulin, and as a group they are called counter-regulatory hormones. Due to the dependence of the brain on plasma glucose for energy, hypoglycemia can rapidly result in unconsciousness, and counter-regulatory hormones act so as to prevent hypoglycemia, and there are many regulatory systems operating to counter this condition. The influence of a variety of systems on glucose homeostasis also reflects the central importance of glucose in metabolism. Now let's discuss how these hormones work. Epinephrine is released by the adrenal medulla in response to hypoglycemia. It is also released in other stress stimuli and also as a part of preparation for exercise. Norepinephrine is released from the sympathetic neurons. Both these catecholamines have significant roles in maintaining glucose levels during exercise, especially in supporting the massive increase in glucose by the muscle and also in stress-related conditions. Catecholamines stimulate glucagon release and inhibit insulin release, causing a decrease in the insulin-glucagon ratio. This therefore has an indirect effect on the liver glucose metabolism. Epinephrine also has a direct effect in stimulating liver gluconeogenesis, muscle glycolysis and glycogen breakdown in both the tissues. Now, another class of hormones called glucocorticoids are the primary cortisols in humans that are released from the adrenal cortex in response to stress. One such stress is decrease in plasma glucose. Glucocorticoids stimulate gluconeogenesis and glycogen synthesis in the liver and reduce the muscle and adipose tissue glucose uptake. They also acutely inhibit insulin release and over a longer term insulin action also. Prolonged cortisol hypersecretion can result in diabetes. Growth hormone is released in response to falling plasma glucose levels, but the mechanism of action of growth hormone related to increase in plasma glucose is poorly understood. The only established action of the growth hormone in this regard is that stimulates the lipolysis and causes the inhibition of normal insulin action. In an abnormal condition called as acromegaly, the overproduction of growth hormone, it leads to diabetes. Now, we shall discuss what happens to carbohydrate metabolism during normal pregnancy. It is seen that there is an increased insulin secretion and decreased insulin sensitivity. During early pregnancy, glucose tolerance is normal or slightly improved, and peripheral, that is muscle sensitivity to insulin and hepatic basal glucose production is also normal. The cause of enhanced insulin secretion is uncertain because peripheral insulin sensitivity and hepatic glucose production rates are not different from the pre-gravid values. This metabolic milieu under the influence of cortisol, estrogens, progestin favors lipogenesis and fat storage. Although the precise mechanism is uncertain, alteration in the hormonal milieu during pregnancy are probably responsible for the reduced insulin sensitivity. Changes in the beta cells responsiveness occur in parallel with growth of the fetoplacental unit and its elaboration of hormones such as human chorionic somatomammotrophine HCS, progesterone, cortisol and prolactin. Prevailing insulin resistance produces exaggerated changes in the postprandial concentration of metabolic fuels, namely glucose, VLDL and amino acid. Insulin resistance serves to shunt the ingested nutrients to the fetus after feeding. So, now I think after listening to this module, you would have got a clear idea of the various factors influencing the carbohydrate metabolism. I am sure it gave you a clear picture about the role of different organs in controlling the glucose homeostasis and how it is influenced by the hormones and dietary factors.